The Big 12 is a crapshoot. You never know what you're going to get when college football comes around. One thing is for certain, though. Arizona State will not win the Big 12 championship. There are a few teams on the list, though, that could be decided a season-defining game. We'll talk about that right here on a special crossover edition of Locked On Kansas State and Locked On Texas Tech.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into a special Locked On crossover edition of Locked On Kansas State and Locked On Texas Tech, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet hits. Chris Level joining me from Locked On Texas Tech. I'm Christian Rauh. You can find me on Locked On Kansas State, anywhere you listen to your podcast, always free and available here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And Chris, we got a fun one to talk about in this episode because although we are in March, and I know you are not sleeping until May, that's for certain. You got a great college basketball team to talk about right now. Let's talk a little college football because it's never too early to talk about the season upcoming. And there was a report that came out earlier this past week on ESPN that said the matchup between Texas Tech and Kansas State could define each college football team's 2025 season. I want to get into your insane portal class as well. Talk about Joey McGuire, see if you can get over the hump. And then, speaking of coaches, we need to talk about a potential new rivalry between the two of us because there are a lot of familiar faces now between these two programs. So let's get into it. Right off the bat, I think we need to discuss that Week 10 between the two teams, Texas Tech and Kansas State. I mean, that's going to be a really fun week between not only these two teams, but the entire Big 12 itself. How are you feeling about Texas Tech after this crazy portal run, after these crazy recruiting classes over the last couple seasons? You guys feel like you're on cloud nine right now this offseason.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think that's fair. There's a lot of optimism, and you know, what's interesting is that kind of tells you where the two programs are or have been. But what Kansas State, what do they win, 8 or 9, and then not? It's just not good enough. Everybody's frustrated and all that, and you know, you won 8 last year, and I think you felt like there was a lot of frustration, you know. But you're trying to get to where Kansas State's been. I mean, and I think that's just the reality of it. I think it was extremely frustrating for Joey and the fan base, but specifically the head coach, that you beat both teams that were in the Big 12 title game. I mean, you're the only one that could say that. You knocked them both off, but you didn't take care of business against, you know, a Baylor or a TCU and Colorado, and you needed one more league win, and you would have been in based on all the tiebreaker scenarios. But you're trying to go for it. You're trying to graduate from hey, this is a fun story to like let's be relevant nationally, and I think that's a hard step to take, and sometimes it doesn't take. You don't get it done quickly, but I think that's what they're trying, because the rules and what is allowed now. I think they're trying to you know, make some things happen, and so yeah, a lot of optimism, and these two programs are one. You know, I would say there's like a group of 5 to 6 that could legitimately state a case for winning the league. I don't know who will be picked to win it, but you've got, you know, Texas Tech and Kansas State, obviously, but I think you'll hear a lot about Arizona State, understandably so. I think BYU deserves to be in the conversation based on what they have coming back. I think Iowa State and then maybe Baylor. That's kind of where that's the group. And then after that, you know, there may be a lot of optimism in Morgantown and Scott Frost and UCF. But I'm just looking at what is back and what you did last year and quarterbacks and all those kinds of things. And these should be two, you know, teams that you're right. Week 10 could point to a lot, and you don't know what you're going to get up to that point because we all try to figure this out way ahead of time, and then you know, somebody like Arizona State picked dead last in the league ends up winning it, and you're like, what? You know, but that's just the beauty of sports, right?
Yeah, and then Utah last year, who finished towards the bottom of the
Yes.
league, are now predicted to be a favorite
Wh-
heading into the new season. I saw
Which
On3 put out a projected college football playoff bracket the other day and had Utah as the only Big 12 team. So
I don't
I'm not going
understand
that
that
far.
one. I don't
Me
understand that one. I don't know. I've seen that. I know they have a new quarterback coming in that's a dual threat, and I think that there's a lot of trust in Kyle Whittingham. I think you could make the same case for Oklahoma State to a certain extent based on
neither.
how many seasons, but I just don't know. And that's, but maybe that we're the ones that are just not, we should be slapped on the wrist for not paying attention to the Kyle Whittinghams and the Mike Gundys and not giving them enough credit after a major step back last year. I don't know, but I wouldn't include either one of those programs in my tier of teams that I would just look at very, very strongly as far as winning the league. But again, I just stated the case from last year. Arizona State being a great example of it turned upside down.
Yeah, I'm with you. When you said your teams, what you feel are like the strongest in that tier, I'm right with you with exactly the same ones. I believe those teams are the ones that are going to be battling for the Big 12 championship. And then all I made a knock about Arizona State and the hook going into this episode. There is truly no certainty with the Big 12, and I think
Right.
we've learned that over the past couple seasons. It's only getting more and more crazy with this new NIL and the transfer portal, as we mentioned. And the more we talk about this, we do kind of have a lot of similarities. We talk about how Joey McGuire is trying to get over that certain win hump where he's got 7-8 wins over his last couple seasons. And Kansas State, although they have had this type of consistency, they're among only 8 programs to win at least 8 games in the last 4 seasons. And you name some of these other programs, you're talking Alabama, Clemson, Georgia's, Notre Dame's. I mean, it's pretty good company to be a part of. Fans are still not happy to where they're at right now. They want that next step. After having the taste of 2022 of that Big 12 championship, they want that next step. And I'm sure that's the exact same feeling for you with Joey McGuire and the rest of this coaching staff, the rest of this program, as they're trying to get to that 9-win tier, maybe even possibly 10-win tier, and get to that next step for the program.
Yeah, I think the stated goal here is obviously you want to win the league championship, and if you do, then the rest of it takes care of itself as far as the playoffs and all that stuff. But I would lower it just on, you just want to get to Arlington. You've never been, and I think that's like frustrating / motivating for a lot of folks around here. I think you're well resourced. I think you feel like you've got a lot of good things in place. You were just right there last year, but you just can't quite, whether it's, because the issue around here for so many years, really since Pat Mahomes was here, is just like a healthy quarterback. You've had quarterback injuries, and that's what is limited you. Joey's first year, he had to start 3 different quarterbacks in league play. That's just not a recipe for success. And so, but with the rules being what they are, I think that there's folks around here that we're very serious about, hey, man, let's swing. Let's swing away at it. Let's put ourselves in the best position that we possibly can, and then let's see what happens. And again, it's easier to get there than it is to stay there. But you're just trying to get there first, and then the challenge will be to try to stay at that level. But and that's the thing about this league. It gets knocked nationally, I guess, because it's not the Big Ten or the SEC or whatever. However, there's just not many gimmies in this deal, man. There's just not. It's a fun league, and I think that. But I mean, we're sitting here talking. We rattled off 5 or 6 teams, and you had a couple of others that could. I mean, that's half the league,
Yeah.
And that's rare for most leagues to say they could, because I mean, South Carolina is not winning the SEC. I mean, or Wisconsin's very unlikely to win the Big Ten. So you can kind of like tier it with these 3 or 4 schools in each of those leagues are probably going to win it. Well, you can't really say that about the Big 12, which is fun, but I guess also what creates some of the criticism that you get too. But I'm excited about it. I know that Kansas State fans are excited and chomping at the bit as well. The one other thing you mentioned about commonalities between these 2 programs, some key changes with their staff. And I don't think you can overstate that or understate it, I should say, because you just don't. That's obviously Kansas State, new offensive coordinator, new offensive line coach, new tight ends coach. I mean, there's some changes there. With Texas Tech, 2 new. Everybody else stayed the same, but 2 new coordinators. And I, what is that going to look like? I think one maybe needed to be changed. The other one, I don't think you wanted to lose, as you lose Zach Kitley to be the head coach at Florida Atlantic. But that's also some things that you'll have to kind of look at and go, okay, what difference does that create? Okay, how quickly do kids pick up a new scheme, or what roles do certain players get moved to, and all that because of a different scheme, whether it's subtle or major change. But a lot of similarities here.
Yeah, and we got to dig into those new coaching changes because some of those have some familiar faces between both the programs. But before we do that, I want to get a little bit more deeper dive into this new portal class and what you're most excited about. Let's get into that next, right here on a special crossover edition of Locked On Kansas State and Locked On Texas Tech. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades. That's Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Well, Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for that extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, if you use promo code SH5, you can get 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Today's episode is also sponsored by Wayfair. Your home should reflect your style, and with Wayfair, it's easier than ever to make that happen. Whether you're looking for a simple refresh or tackling a big home project, Wayfair has everything you need in one place. Wayfair's huge selection makes it easier to find the perfect piece, no matter the space or the budget, from cozy furniture and stylish decor to kitchen essentials and outdoor must-haves. Wayfair has it all, and the prices fit your budget. So head over to wayfair.com and find something that just hits your style today. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. Welcome on in and welcome back to the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making both of our shows your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On College Basketball with Isaac Shade and Andy Patton. March is here, folks. So be the most informed college basketball fan throughout the madness. Find Locked On College Basketball on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're talking the season upcoming, the college football season. It is never too early to talk college football. And week 10, Texas Tech takes on Kansas State, which could be a season-defining game for not only both programs, but the Big 12 heading into the new year. I would never have expected, when we were talking last season, predicting who was going to be at top, Oklahoma State to not win a single conference game, right? So there's definitely some question marks to me. With the risk of eating my own shorts at the end of the season, I feel like every team could be a potential Arizona State of last year, with the exception of Arizona and Cincinnati. I feel like those are the two you can put to the side. Everybody else, I'm like, there's a chance you could do what the Sun Devils did. Texas Tech is in that same spot for me. I feel like they have this opportunity to make a huge step forward. And that's why I really wanted to have this chat with you today, because of this amazing transfer portal that they brought in. The amount of hype that came into me can be two-sided. And I've heard it both on social media, and I want to get your thoughts, because I've heard where it can get you to the next step with adding to the last two recruiting classes you've had, plus this transfer portal. But then I hear this devil's advocate side, and it might be a troll job, or it might be whatever you want to call it, Chris, but they like to also bring back, well, remember what Colorado did a few years ago with all their transfer portals. Is this what Texas Tech is going to do because of this huge rebuild? I don't believe that, but I want to hear what you have to say about this new transfer portal class.
Yeah, Christian, I think it's a great point. I think that the portal window and portal scenario is a tool Some go all in, some dabble. I think Texas Tech was somewhere in between that, because I think ultimately when you get to the end of the regular season, and Joey was on the record as saying, yeah, we're going to add 8 to 10 guys. We need to fill in some gaps, and we're going to be very aggressive. We're going to aim very high with not just role player type guy. We're going to try to go find like legit guys. And I think that his comment to me was there was just so much production in the portal. And I think that they were so well resourced that people kept stepping up and they kept going, let's just keep going. And it was about the thing about the portal thing is you can go acquire talent, but the tricky part is, did you choose correctly? Did you find the right guy? In that, do they really love the sport? Will they play hard for you when adversity hits? Are they going to buy into what you're trying to sell from a team aspect for a bunch of guys that just got here? And that's the biggest trick with all this stuff. So if Texas Tech chose correctly, because they definitely added legit talent, and it's just the folks that cover this nationally were like, oh yeah. But personally, what I was most excited about is what Texas Tech struggled with a year ago was at the lines of scrimmage. They just weren't good enough up front on either side of the ball. So they had 3 potential starters on the offensive line and 4 potential starters, or 3 or so on the defensive line. But then there's secondary. They added 4, what they are saying to go along with one of the guys that's returning could start at corner for them. So they had 4 new DBs because their pass defense was atrocious. And so they really, and most of these guys, there's some of them that are 1 year, one and done, but a lot of these guys are 2 or 3 year guys. And that's what I was pumped about, is that you have a chance to grow old with some of these guys, and they'll get to be around here for a bit. But you go take a second team all conference defensive tackle, Lee Hunter from UCF, who is a load, and you beat Texas for him. You go add Anthony Holmes from University of Houston, because for all of Houston's issues last year, defense wasn't one of them. And, obviously the connection there when you take their defensive coordinator. So that's what I was most – big people. There's just not – that's why the SEC typically is so good in this space, is they have better big people and more of them than everybody else does. And you were trying to – I had somebody tell me, it's like, hey, we're trying to – look like that and play like that and all that. That's what it takes. And you need depth. And, because by week 10, I don't know what these two teams will look like, with injuries and all that. But you try to, a lot of this is insurance. A lot of this is depth and creating competition. But and Kansas State, I know that we'll get into one addition that's very familiar to Texas Tech fans. But did they dabble heavily into the portal? Did they tinker? I mean, you kind of take me through what Kansas State did from a portal standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, they did a little bit more than I expected. And I thought that we were only going to get about 9 or 10 players in the portal, and it wound up being about 14. And they did exactly, on the same aspects. They kind of just pointed towards every positional need and went for it. And then I don't think they might have got their number 1 pick in every single of the scenarios, but they addressed the wide receiver room, which to me was probably the biggest need, because you had players leaving in the portal. You needed players that were obviously you just needed an upgrade in that position group, and we're going to get to that in just a second. But you talked about the trenches, and you took care of offensive line, and that's something that Kansas State has had and has been really good at over the past couple of years. When you hear about the next level, and we just saw it in this year's Super Bowl, right? The trenches are what have changed and what have made this team, or this game, so difficult to defend. And, not to throw shade at a former Texas Tech quarterback, but Patrick Mahomes had a really tough time with the pass rush of the Eagles during the Super Bowl, right? With the offensive line, defensive line adding, when you think of a first round pick for Kansas State, you're thinking of offensive linemen. I feel like that's where our successes came in. So if Texas Tech is really putting some focus on the trenches, that helps me say even more that week 10 is going to be an exciting game. But we can obviously say that what we're getting in week 0 or week 1, depending on where you start your season, is probably not going to be the same roster in week 10. I agree with you 100% on that. But adding more to the portal talk of Kansas State, they really addressed the secondary as well, cornerback and safety, added some big dudes, some that already have Big 12 experience, like Gunnar Maldonado. It's going to be a really fun, I think it's going to be a really fun season for Kansas State. Before we should keep going, because I feel like we're finding a way to just get all of this conversation into 30 minutes. This is going to be a tough one to do as I see this clock just rolling up, but this is fun. I'm really excited. So to have this conversation. Matt Wells is now going to be named the offensive coordinator. He was with the Wildcats last season. Now he's holding the job title all by himself. That name might sound familiar to you. I'm sure it does. Former Tech head coach. He was with the Wildcats last season, as I mentioned, but now he has the reins. What went wrong with the tenure at Texas Tech, if Kansas State fans maybe not know? And should Kansas State fans be worried about him running the offense all by himself in year 2 of Avery Johnson with him behind the wheel?
Yeah, I mean, with Matt here, I think I mentioned it earlier. I think the main thing you could point to was quarterback injuries. And ultimately, what's interesting is that it's like full circle moment here. He was let go after losing to Kansas State.
Yeah, I do remember that.
And they were 5-3 at the time. But I'm friends with Matt. He used to live like 2 streets over from me when he was here. And I saw him when Texas Tech basketball was up in Manhattan back in January. I spent some time with Matt, visited with him, love the guy. It just didn't work here. I think he would probably have a different opinion of that. But I think that the administration, I guess is the way I would phrase that, is that they just didn't feel like that the big picture direction was heading the right way, or the buy-in was there from the fan base, or whatever it was. And but he left a lot of good players here. I will tell you that. And I think Texas Tech certainly. I mean, Tyree Wilson, who was a top 10 pick in the NFL draft, was recruited here by Matt Wells, and Keith Patterson, who's the head coach at Abilene Christian right now. He was the 7th pick in the draft by the Raiders 2 years ago. And that was a direct recruitment by Matt and whatnot. But Matt's a really good coach. He's known Chris Kleiman for a long time. Matt obviously played at Utah State, Coach Jordan Love. I'm sure you've heard a lot about their interactions and all those things. I think, Matt got Tyler Shuck to come here, and Tyler Shuck is going to be drafted in the NFL draft. I think a couple years ago, Texas Tech had to make a decision. We can't keep all these quarterbacks here, so we're going to keep the younger one with maybe more upside. And so, Shuck ended up going to Louisville and finished up his career there. But, from a recruiting standpoint, and Matt's just good people. I was a big fan of his, still am, and we're still good friends and all that. So I think that's a really good. I was happy for him. He spent a couple years at Oklahoma under Coach Venables, just kind of doing that coach rehab thing, analyst work and all that, while Tech was paying his salary. And I think he spun that into a situation with Coach Kleiman, and he got back on the field, and I think he'll do a really good job. But from a recruiting standpoint, X's and O's, just personality, I mean, he checks a lot of boxes.
Optimistic for me when it comes to Matt Wells at the offense coordinator spot, holding it by himself for Avery Johnson and for the Kansas State Wildcats, because when I go back to looking at what he did with Jordan Love at Utah State, going past Tech, looking behind it, he really focused on the play action with Love. And that's something that Avery Johnson certainly excelled at over his first season. And the speed that Kansas State's offense is going to be bringing in is really exciting, with Dylan Edwards at running back. Jace Brown, I think, is going to have a big year. And they added some size at wide receiver, Chris. And one of those is a familiar name that you and the rest of the Texas Tech community is probably aware of. Let's get to that name and a little bit more familiar faces, as well as the rest of the Big 12 outlook. Let's finish that up right here on a special Locked On crossover edition of Locked On Kansas State and Locked On Texas Tech. This episode is sponsored by FanDuel. March Madness is here, folks, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200, 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. I've got an eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them up with spreads, totals, game props, you name it. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoop action all tournament long. Again, that's FanDuel.com. It's never too early to talk about college football, especially when we're talking weeks into the future. Week 10, that's when Texas Tech and Kansas State will take on each other in a game that could define the season for both programs, as they are trying to get back, for the first time, potentially for Texas Tech, to the Big 12 championship. Welcome on in. If you haven't already, please do us a favor, hit that subscribe button below, as we are getting ready to have a fantastic Big 12 college football season. And for Chris, he gets to have hopefully a long run in the NCAA tournament coming up very soon. But with that being said, though, we just talked about Matt Wells, what he's going to bring to Kansas State. His brother Luke Wells also has ties to Tech. He's named the Kansas State tight end coach. But what I really want to get into is Jared Bradley. He's going to be returning to the Big 12 after coming back to the Wildcats in the transfer portal. He was formerly with Texas Tech. He was with Boston College last season. His numbers at Boston College didn't look great. There was some speculation that he was dealing with injuries or sickness or whatever the case may be. But when you look at his numbers at Tech, he certainly shined before leaving in the portal. He brings size to Kansas State, and he's not the only one that is bringing size. That's something that's been a big question mark for this offense for quite some time, really under Chris Kleiman. He comes along with Purdue's Jared Tibbs, Medford as well. Those new 3 wide receivers are going to be really exciting for Kansas State. But I want to focus on Bradley here because you have firsthand experience on watching him play. What is your thoughts about him returning to the Big 12?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised, and obviously the link there is Matt and Luke and everybody that was there that coached him here. I think there's a couple of moments that I remember from him as a younger player here. He had a big catch in a bowl game versus Mississippi State in the Liberty Bowl. During his freshman season. I think, ironically enough, his last year at Tech 2 years ago, his biggest game or kind of drive, if you will, was at the end of the game in Lawrence, Kansas, comeback win to beat the Jayhawks on their home field. It was a kind of one of those last-minute drives, and he had a couple of big catches in that one. He's got a lot of size, and I think he was a freshman – All-American type player. And then I just think his issue has been consistency. Can you do this every Saturday? He would battle some drops because you'd see the potential and be like, whoa, God, he looks the part. He's got some skills. And maybe it was maturity. Maybe it was, I'm not real sure what the issue would have been. But it didn't necessarily surprise me when he left here. I think that was kind of a, hey, man, good luck to you. I don't think there was a lot of, hey, please stay, don't leave. I think it was just kind of maybe a best for all parties to. I followed him at Boston College, and I was wondering what he would do, and it wasn't much. And maybe you mentioned some of the reasons why. But I think that obviously, Matt and Luke and everybody there in Manhattan, Kansas will figure out ways to utilize him. And he's a get off the bus early type guy. He looks the part. This is what it's supposed to look like. And I think if you get the mature, more consistent version, you'll like the player a lot for sure. Because is he going to lead you in receptions game in and game out? I don't know if I would say that, but he's a big play guy that I think provides some juice. And again, there's a catch radius there that comes with somebody that's got those measurables. So I'm curious, and I don't know what it'll be like, going against him. I didn't necessarily envision him being back in the Big 12 after he left, but here we are. So it was a very familiar name to everybody here for sure.
Yeah, I don't know if he's going to lead in receptions. I'm with you on that. But would I be interested to see if he leads in targets when we're in the goal line situation?
Okay.
I think that would be what I'd be focused on. Tight ends led the country last year for Kansas State in touchdowns. I wonder if that changes much. Obviously, Luke Wells is going to have a lot to say with that. But with the size coming in, with the wide receiver room, I wonder how much is going to change with that scheme. We're getting into spring practice now, Chris. As we obviously, like I said, there's never too early to talk college football. What's one of the biggest things that you're paying attention to? Maybe one of the top storylines that you're paying attention to for Tech this spring?
Yeah, I think the competition that you've created because you didn't really lose anybody that you wanted to from your current roster, and then you brought in 18 new guys, and all high end in most cases, and I think you're technically over your numbers and all those things, and so this is going to lead to some difficult conversations after spring concludes and going, hey man, we don't have a spot for you if these roster limits get set like we think. And on July 1st, I guess, when you get to get down to 105, because I want to say you're a little over 120. And I think most programs are like this, but that's what I'm curious about, is like the competition that some of this created. And corner, offensive line, I think defensive line. And so if you're a player like that was a redshirt freshman or a redshirt sophomore at Texas Tech, and you've kind of just been hanging around and just kind of waiting for your turn may never come if you don't really show a lot right now, because they may have to go, we don't have time to wait to develop you. We've got so many spots we need, and so that's where the main storyline around here, though, is that Behren Morton, your quarterback last year, had some shoulder surgery back in early December. He's going to miss the spring. And so Will Hammond, the stud freshman that played last year, he's going to get the bulk of the reps, the first team. And so we're all kind of waiting, when does Behren get back and get cleared, and what does it look like? Is everything okay? And so there's a bit of a question mark there, but obviously Will Hammond will benefit from all these reps. So that's where it would be here. How about you? What are you looking at there in Manhattan?
Wide receivers. I really want to see that wide receiver group shine. I want to see what we can see from there. I want to see if our top recruit, Lincoln Cure, actually has some sort of maybe a spot. Maybe he burns his red shirt and we actually see him play. And then I think the secondary. I think the secondary was one of the biggest glaring issues, although we're going to have two of them go get drafted in the NFL. But that adds more to the fire of how much concerns that could be moving up. But I think they added the right pieces. So that's where my focus is shifting. But there's a lot to be excited about. Avery Johnson, second season at the helm as the starting quarterback. I think he makes a nice step forward. And I think Matt Wells is going to be a really big reason why he does it. With that being said, week 10, the two of us face off against each other. It's going to be a really exciting game. It's a really exciting game of the season for the entire Big 12, with Iowa State taking on Arizona State at the same time. Could you see a scenario where that week in the conference decides what happens for the rest of the year for the Big 12? Like maybe decides who goes to Arlington?
Yeah, maybe. Again, if things are like we think they are, and that's the hardest part to figure out. There's going to be some injuries that alter this. Somebody's going to come off the radar and be a lot better than we thought. Somebody that we think is going to be really good is just not going to be, and that's the beauty of this stuff. But I would envision, because you're talking about a scenario there, like think about it in these terms: Avery Johnson, Behren Morton, Sam Levitt, and Rauh Becht. Okay, if those four guys are healthy and have played up until that point, I would certainly think that you could, in fact, say, boy, that those are some heavyweight games at that stage of the conference season, because of what you have coming back at quarterback, and you're not having to try to figure out that spot, because that's what I lean to that as much as anything on if a team's going to be good or not, because you just know that good quarterback play overcomes a lot. And if those guys are still healthy and have played the bulk of the snaps and the games leading up to that point, they're going to be in a good spot. And it may not be the best spot, but they're going to be in a good one, and they'll be in most games. So that's week 10, mark it down, circle it.
Final thoughts before you go, Chris. First off, where can everybody find you? And finally, does Joey McGuire get over the hump? Does he get the 9 or 10 wins in 2025?
Well, he's gonna die trying. If not, I mean, he's just like, I'm a little uneasy about some of the pressure but it's weird. It's all internally. They're being outspoken about putting this pressure on themselves, and like that they have failed. You just don't see this much. Like we will have failed, and we will have fallen way short if we don't get to Arlington. And that's internally. This isn't somebody writing this, and so I think they're trying to, in ways, speak this into existence and saying we are trying everything we can, and if we don't, we've screwed it up. And it's already some ownership way ahead of these things playing out on it, which is just weird to say, because you don't want to necessarily sometimes put yourself on your own radar or on the radar, but that's just the reality of where they're at. And I just, Texas Tech going to Manhattan, Kansas, you've only won there in, I think, 2004 and 2008. it's been a house of horrors for the Red Raiders in Manhattan. It just had, and really against Kansas State in general. I think last win was in 2015 over the old Wildcats, the old Wabash Cannonball. I'm really used to seeing that way too much there from a Red Raider standpoint. And it's just so fascinating that Kansas State is ultimately what got Matt let go. You were up 21-0 in that game, and then you didn't hold on and you lost, and now he's sitting there with that purple on there in Manhattan, Kansas, in the Little Apple. So wild stuff. You can find us at Locked On Texas Tech. I'm so pumped for March with March Madness coming up. Don't sleep on Jerome Tang just yet. I know it's been a disappointing season for everybody, but it's not going to shock me a bit if they make a little noise in Kansas City, and we'll just kind of see where that goes. But hey, man, Christian, you were very, very kind to host us today and for inviting me on. And yeah, man, let's do it again.
Yeah, I'm holding on to Jerome Tang. I like what he says with this buy-in. I want to see what we can see moving forward. I don't think we have a choice either way, so I think you got to hop on board. And for the record, 8 in a row. That's how many times Kansas State's beat Texas Tech. Might as well throw that last little shade at you while we can. You can find Kansas State shows here on Locked On Kansas State anywhere you listen to your podcast, free and available. The exact same places you can get Locked On Texas Tech. Thanks for listening. Please like the video. Please subscribe. And this has been a special Locked On crossover edition of Locked On Kansas State and Locked On Texas Tech.